On this week's episode of the Full Subjects podcast, we are talking all about upsizing. This is a very common topic that we're seeing in the market. A lot of people wondering if it makes sense for them based off of their situation, among other things. And I think too, typically when people get into the market, one of the things that they do look at after they've been in that first place, that second place, is getting into something that's going to be a lot bigger that can suit them for potentially longer. We also always talk about how different markets have different opportunities. And I think upsizing is a really interesting play right now. So yeah, thanks for joining us for another episode. As always, guys, this podcast is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute any legal, tax, financial, investment, or any other advice. It's not intended to cause or induce breach of any existing agency agreement. And let's get into it.
Today we're going to talk about upsizing in today's market and just kind of in markets in general, and some things that you should look for. We're gonna touch on some real life experience. We've got Alex Dunbar back for another episode with us. Austin's got some real life experience in this as well. So yeah, we're just gonna kind of see some things to watch out for, and just kind of get a general idea of what does it look like to upsize in the market. So without making this too simple, what does this mean, guys? What does upsizing mean?
Moving from a smaller home to a bigger home.
That's exactly what I didn't want you to say.
It means utilizing the equity that you have built up, as well as some potential savings after living in a place that you've been in, to deciding you need more space. And that can be for a multitude of reasons. You know, maybe you need more space because you've got a growing family. Maybe that just means that you were in an entry-level product and now you want to get to maybe something bigger or more long-term. Maybe in some cases it means that you're in a larger townhome and maybe you want to get to a detached home. Maybe you don't plan on utilizing all of that space, and maybe you want to have the same amount of space, but maybe you want to add in some rental income or something like that. So there's multiple different reasons why people might decide. Maybe you're going from a less premium area to a more premium area, and that will bring up the purchase price as well. You know, I know of a ton of people that maybe go from a one bed and den in Langley to a one bed and den in New West and Burnaby, and maybe that adds $100,000 just based off the product or whatever. So selling and then buying something for more money.
Yeah. All right. I like that. Well said. Let's talk about the selling side of it first, and then we'll talk about the buying side. So when you're selling, and obviously you're selling to move, what are some things that you have to be weary of, or what are some things that you can do to make sure that you're not waiting around too long to sell? Because ultimately you already have a place in mind that you're looking to buy.
Yeah, I think you need to be really honest with what you think you're worth, as well as what product you want to be going to. And depending on what product you want to go to and your criteria, I think that's going to shift things a little bit. So as an example, if there's one specific complex that you really want to be in, that's going to be much different than, you know, I was looking at a complex recently that's a nicer one in Langley, and there's 4 or 5 different units that are all basically all priced the same, short of a couple individual features, maybe where you are in the complex, being an end unit or not. Like, they're basically the same place with different amounts of wear and tear and stuff. So depending on where you want to go, that might change your approach on how to get there.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's just like figuring out what you've got in hand right now, like what you're able to essentially get for your place, combined with your level of income and potentially investments, whatever. Basically getting a pre-approval, as well as speaking with a realtor to get a pretty strong understanding of what you're able to sell for. And that's going to create your budget at the end of the day, right? And there's honestly not really a point in looking until you've done that. Because I've seen too many people that get their heart set on something and then realize that they can't necessarily actually afford it. So I'd rather, get we'll call it the boring stuff out of the way first, and then you can move forward from there.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think it's understanding the full cost of the move, right? It's yeah, okay, I have X amount of equity, but how much of that equity am I actually going to walk away with? Because there's obviously cost of selling, and then there's cost of buying. So maybe you have, well, not maybe, you do have to consider the extra things like property transfer tax. There's moving costs, there's legal costs, and all those costs have to be factored into that as well. So that number, that X, that equity that you have, there's things that equity is going to have to pay for beyond the down payment. You have to be aware of what all those costs are. And then Alex, I think you've said it really well. Make sure you get pre-approved. Absolutely. I think you should get pre-approved as soon as you start thinking about selling, because ultimately you are going to be buying as well. And it's a good idea to know, okay, what am I pre-approved for based on how much of a down payment I have? And then that'll kind of determine if this is even a good option for you. Because the last thing you want to do is you want to go through the selling process, get an accepted offer, and then go, oh crap, I can't get approved for what I actually want. Now I'm not going to sell, and I've just gone through the whole process of selling. So I think that's well said.
I think one of the things that's interesting with that as well, with pre-approve, getting pre-approved before, we talk about this all the time. As much as interest rates fluctuate, prices will fluctuate. The big thing that people that are living anywhere need to kind of come to terms with is their monthly payment and their monthly expenses, right? So you can talk about a certain purchase price or a certain interest rate. You know, a lot of people want to know, hey, what is it? What do I make each month? And what does it cost me to live here? And as much as those things fluctuate, I think there's a bit of an adjustment as well for people that maybe purchased in the 2019, 2020, even some parts of 2021, depending on what their interest rate would be. Those people, like we talked about on the last episode, are coming up for a renewal. Alex had mentioned that, for a lot of, anecdotally, what you're seeing out there is a lot of people worried about, oh, my payment's going to go up a ton of money because I was locked in at this lower rate. And, Cole then talked about some of the different things you can do to adjust that monthly payment, whether that's refinance, extend your amortization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's really interesting to look at, okay, if I'm staying here, what is it going to cost me? And what does that number look like versus if I'm going to move and upsize, what does that number look like? And then again, you can kind of adjust accordingly.
Yeah, because I think there's always a max budget, and then I call it like your comfort budget.
Yeah.
And for a long period of time, unfortunately, a lot of people had to get pretty close to that maximum budget. But finally, I'm starting to see a little bit of wiggle room there where people are like, and I always tell them hey, I don't need to know your top budget. I need to know that you're qualified for whatever you're comfortable with. We don't have to go there. We used to have to a lot of the time, but it does come down to those monthly payments at the end of the day. And I actually have a friend who they're in the opposite situation where they've got like a 7% interest rate right now in a condo. And they're like, hey, we want to make the upsize right now. Rates are actually better. So we want to try and keep our payments similar.
Interesting.
And that's not the majority of people. I think I'm not going to speak on it, but maybe, I don't know if it caught the top of the market or if it was like a B lender type product or something like that. But because of that, now it's like, hey, we can actually keep our payments the same or close to, make this move to the next property. And then the second part of that, I think I'll add into it, and maybe Cole, you can speak on it a bit more, is sometimes you can do that if you're moving into a detached home that has a rental suite, right? So I think that can really play a role as well, which it's a very common strategy here in the Lower Mainland. But there's two sides to it, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily help you, and I've learned this, qualify for as much as I thought it would, but it can actually significantly reduce your overall payment. So I don't know if you want to touch on it.
No, that's a really good point. So first thing I want to say is if you are moving from a stratified property to a detached property, so immediately you're going to lose that condo fee. So that does impact your qualification. That is a cost that you have to pay every month. So there is a little bit of more qualification because of that. Now, obviously, we're not talking about thousands of dollars. We're talking about hundreds of dollars, but it still can help. And then to answer your question, I would say I agree. Having the extra rental suite doesn't necessarily maybe impact as much as some people think. It's I can get this much extra rent, therefore I can qualify for extensively more. But that's not always the case. But you're right in to say that just because it doesn't qualify you for more, you still get that money. That's the money you're getting. And typically, the way that it works is you have to go based on market rents, not based on actual rents, because you typically can't have a tenancy agreement in place before you move there, because the person you're going to be renting to has never seen the place. So how are you going to have a tenancy agreement in place? I'm not saying it's impossible, but it can be done in some circumstances, but typically you're going based off of market rents. Market rents aren't always going to equate to what you actually rented for, right? So what I'm trying to say is, yes, you're still going to get that money, and that money will significantly help with your mortgage payment or with any of your living costs. So that is a great advantage, but you got to ask yourself the question of, do you want to be living with somebody else? Do you want somebody to be renting in your home? As much as you may not be living with them and they have their own isolated area, you still live in a home with them and you share that home with them. So that's a big question you got to ask yourself. And if you're only doing it because I need the money in order to qualify for this home, but I really don't want to live with somebody else, then you got to ask yourself, is that the right time to do this? Or Is it something maybe I can do in the short term? I can rent it out, and then eventually I'll be at a point where I don't need to rent it out anymore, and then we can have the home ourselves. Like, those are things that I would be considering if I'm on the fence about whether or not that makes sense to me.
So I got two questions on what you're just talking about. So number one, if there is already someone living there that's paying rent and they use that, and number two, could you give me like a ballpark for, let's say the market rent for the basement suite is $2,000, how much additional qualification could you potentially get?
Yeah. So first question, typically you can use it as long as you're going to continue with that agreement. So let's say the agreement's passing on to the next owner, then yes, in most cases you could use that. Second question, I hate to say this, it depends. Like, it depends on the lender, but I mean, in general, they use different strategies for how they qualify rental income, and those strategies change depending on if it's a subject rental, non-subject rental, and I'm sure you guys kind of are somewhat aware of that. But typically, what they're going to do is they're either going to add back a portion of that to the income. So they're going to take some of that and add it to your income, or what they're going to do is they're going to use that to reduce some of your costs. And then basically what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, well, if my mortgage is $4,000, but I'm collecting this much in rent, I can take this much off of my monthly cost. Therefore, the amount that I need to qualify for is not $4,000, it's only $2,500. And therefore I can qualify for more because now the monthly payment I actually have to make is $2,500, not $4,000. I don't want to give a blanket answer to that because it does depend on the lender. It's my job to determine what's going to be the best option for you. So if your ideal situation is qualify for the most, then I'm going to find the lender that's going to allow us to use the most amount of income. If your ideal situation is, hey, I want to pay the absolute least amount, because at the end of the day, the least amount is going to be based on the rate and it's going to be based on those factors. It's not going to be based on how much of that income we can use to qualify, then we might be looking somewhere else, right? So I think there's a few things to consider there, but there's different approaches depending on the lender. But in general, you're never going to be able to use 100% of that income. I can say that it's never going to be 100%. Because they're always going to worry about vacancies. Like, there's a possibility that those people leave. There's all these other things that they try to take into consideration, plus the costs of owning a rental, because the amount you get in rent is never going to be 100%. Like, there's going to be costs associated with that as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's perfect.
Okay, so we talked about selling, but I want to kind of talk about subject to sale. I'm going to throw this to Austin first, because we haven't heard from you in a little while, Austin. Some things to watch for with subject to sale. I mean, it's not always going to happen when you're upsizing, but I would say it's going to happen quite often. I mean, it's very rare that you're going to sell and then like you're going to have a firm sale before you buy. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that, but maybe you guys can just talk a little bit to that. How those things typically play out and kind of the best approach when it comes to that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to look at this. I think you need to look at this from the seller side, and then you also need to look at this from being on the buyer side. So if I'm on the seller side and I have somebody that wants to be subject to sale, I have a lot of questions. Is your marketing done? Is your place ready to go on the market? How long is it going to take you to get on the market? What are you going to be priced at? Is that product actually moving? Because all of those things are going to affect whether or not you are successful with your subject to sale. If I'm on the buyer side and people are wanting to go subject to sale, if they're wanting to upsize, I mean, there's two different ways to look at that. Again, it goes back to what I was talking about before in the sense of like, are you only moving because this particular product showed up, became available? Or are you sitting there saying, hey, look, I know I need to upsize for XYZ reason or something that I want to do. There's tons of opportunity. There's tons of product that I know will fit my budget, desired area, age of place I want to get to. Like I was mentioning before, some complexes have 2, 3, 4, 5 listings in it that are kind of similar. So I think that's all going to factor in. And everybody's situation is going to be different, so it really depends. But again, if I'm on the buyer side and I'm wanting to go to subject to sale, I'm, making sure that we have our marketing done ahead of time. And, for a realtor, that can also be a little bit risky in the sense of I might be doing media floor plans, basically spending, good amount of money to get this place on the market to find out that they're not moving. So with that being said, you want to really talk to the clients about, okay, we need to do everything we can to make sure this happens at a fairly, good pace, because one, you obviously want to move to this place, but two, you don't want to, try a price that's too high that you then need to adjust. Like, you really need to be a lot more deliberate with getting onto the market and being where you need to be, because time is of the essence if you are subject to sale.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, I always present it to people as like pros and cons. Kind of as you said, it all depends your situation. There's so many different factors, but like, if you're writing subject to sale, you're almost always going to pay more of a premium. Mm-hmm. You have the potential for losing that property because you can get bumped, mm-hmm. right? You're most likely going to have to pay for an inspection ahead of time and do your due diligence and this sort of thing.
Yes.
And there's no guarantee that your place is going to sell. And then, all those other factors are going to come into play of like how that's all going to play out. Like if you're not ready, that's also going to be a detriment towards the seller on the other side, right? Like that means even more of a premium. If you've got everything ready, or if you're already on the market and you're able to kind of convey that to the other agent, like, hey, here's what we have, right? This is the product. Here's the marketing. Like we can show you everything. This is what we're going to list it at. That gives them a lot more confidence versus somebody who kind of just like throws it out there and you don't know if it's going to be 2 weeks or whatnot until they actually get the property there. And obviously they should be asking those questions to find out what it is you're selling and those sorts of other things. And then the other side of it is, okay, well, what are the pros and cons of selling first and then buying? And I mean, first of all, it's like, do you have a place to stay? Like, what is your plan if your place doesn't sell soon enough, right? Or not necessarily soon enough, but what if you sell first and you don't have a place to buy? So I guess there's kind of three scenarios. I'm going to stay away from the buy before you sell without a subject to sale for the purpose of this, because I don't think that's generally what people should be doing. But if you're selling first and then buying, you obviously want to have a longer time frame, but the risk is you don't find something in time. Okay, does that mean you're living with family? Does that mean you have to find a short-term rental? What does that situation look like for you? And so once you've kind of figured that out, then it's okay, well, we should be able to get a better price, but we may not be able to line the dates up. And not to say you cannot always line the dates up on the other side, but you have a better ability to. So yes, you might feel a little bit more rushed, better price point though, and you know exactly what you're working with versus on the other side where it's like, hey, we need a specific number in order to make this happen or the whole thing can fall apart.
I think one of the things that's interesting with that as well, just from experience, is like when you go subject to sale, you kind of anchor your price. And what I mean by that is like, you've committed to spending X amount on this place, whatever you want to buy. And then what happens if your place doesn't sell at the number that you're hoping to come off on at, and you're basing all of your math based off of that? Well, what happens if you need to sell for 10, 15, 20 grand less in order to be successful? So now all of a sudden you've committed to paying X amount. I think it's fair to say that we're in a slowly declining market. So now you've anchored here, you think you're here, but what happens if you're actually here? Like you're 1 or 2% less than that. Or you just don't get that bite, or what happens if something happens in your inspection that you then need to repair that's going to cost you money, and then you're left with less money in your pocket at the end? Like all of those factors can change. And let's say you're really wanting to get to 20% down so you can get a 30-year amortization. Like all of those things slowly start to add up, but you've committed to saying, hey, I'm going to purchase it for this amount. In theory, could you go back to them and say, hey, like, is there any way that we can adjust the price on this? Sometimes it works, but what happens if that says no? Like they haven't changed their position. All you've committed to purchasing this subject to you selling your own place kind of puts you in a bit of a gray area, a bit of a tough spot.
I actually did that this year with a client where realistically, after we got the accepted on theirs, well, we had one, everything was going to be magical and come together, and then the deal on ours fell apart, and then things kind of slowed down pretty quickly after that. And it had been a few weeks, and reached out and just said, hey, you guys haven't really had any action. We haven't had a ton that's going on. I just want to make this work for both parties. But if we're going to lower our price, we also, would appreciate if you guys did as well. Otherwise, we can't make the change now, and we're probably just sitting in a stalemate.
Staring contest. Yeah,
exactly. So again, and not everyone would do that. It worked out in that situation, but it's not something I would be planning for.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because hypothetically, and again, this isn't legal advice or realtor advice, you'd be in a position there where it's like, I was going to buy Cole's place subject to me selling my place. I'm not going to be able to do that. And then if you lower your price and then maybe get a bite and then go back to Cole, he could be saying, well, you were willing to spend $580 before, but now you're only offering me $550, puts you in a really tough spot. So anyway, yeah, just food for thought, something to think about.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. I think it kind of goes back to what Alex was saying before, your comfort range a little bit, and it kind of ties into that a little bit, Austin, because it's, well, what is the absolute bottom line number that I need to get in order to make this work? And that's in some ways what you kind of have to base your, well, sorry, what I actually mean is like, if I end up getting this much less, maybe that's what I base it on. I don't base it on what I'm hoping to get. I'm basing it on what I know I should be able to get without issue in order for the numbers to work. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes you're like, you know what? I'm hoping and praying everything works out perfectly. And then maybe we get the situation like Alex said, where it's okay, we got to come back to the table and see if we can negotiate together to make this work, or else both deals maybe fall apart, right? So it's just it's a tricky situation. Do you guys have anything you want to touch on in terms of like, it doesn't have to be personal experience necessarily, but just kind of things to watch out for in these situations, or things that can come up that maybe people should be aware of?
I think the first one, I kind of touched on it, but would be buying before you sell without a subject to sale, and just, I don't know, assuming that you're going to be able to sell at a certain price and in a certain time frame. I have seen other people get themselves into some, really unfortunate situations where they're almost having to do like a last second kind of yard sale type deal and just get rid of it, because otherwise they're going to lose a deposit, potentially be sued for damages. And that's something I don't think everyone understands, is like it's not always just your deposit. It could be worse than that, but I'd say it's not the best case scenario, but sometimes you have to look at it that way. So that'd be like the first thing I would definitely say. Yeah, I don't know, Austin, if you had anything else that stood out.
Yeah, I think we talk about all the time how, we're talking about price, right? Oh, it's price. This is what, as kind of the main point of an offer, terms, flexibility with dates, all of that stuff. Because when you're subject to sale, right? Like, you can put dates on the contract, but what happens if somebody comes in and, they want to close in a month? And on the other contract, you have 2.5 months to close. That's going to be problematic potentially, because what I think gets missed a lot of times when we're talking about real estate transactions is they're all dominoes. Like, these people will also want to sell and potentially move somewhere else. That place might be vacant and you can kind of, choose whenever, but that's also a holding cost for the sellers as well. If they're paying $4,000 or $5,000 a month or whatever the mortgage is on a place for it to sit empty, all of that's going to have to come out in the wash of being figured out too. So, flexibility with dates is going to be a factor. There's a lot of other dominoes that need to line up when you're subject to sale. Maybe you have something in your contract where you can adjust the dates. But with that also being said, those sellers are also going to need to find a place. And what are they looking for? Is there tons of opportunity? Is there a specific place that they're always looking at? Like, not just because you're the only offer at the time doesn't mean it's going to be accepted either. So there's a lot of moving parts with subject to sale for sure.
I think the one interesting thing that we never hear about here, but I've heard about it a few times in like the interior or Okanagan, is a subject to purchase from the seller side. Because I don't know, personally, I'd have a really hard time advising anyone to take that. And I think maybe those are the situations where this is a property somebody has been looking at for 7 years. And they're like, when this thing hits the market, like, we want to be the ones to buy it. And they're kind of stuck and that's the only option because that's the only thing they'll offer them. But I just be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that, because I think that's absolutely wild, because you give them the whole power. And I mean, obviously there's probably a time frame on most of those, but you kind of tie yourselves up, especially if the other side is unrealistic, which is hard to say whether they are or not, because you don't know what kind of, it's not like they're putting out there like, hey, this is the house that we want to buy. Like, here's the 3 houses in comparison to like, hey, here's our house that we're selling, and like, here's where we're going to price it and whatnot. So it's an interesting one.
Go ahead, Austin. I'm still thinking about that one.
I think what's interesting with that too is it really, like, legally, is it really truly an invitation to trade if it's subject to you buying something? Conditions are potential obstacles or potential roadblocks, and they're there for a reason. Don't get me wrong. Like, you should be reviewing strata documents and getting a home insurance quote and, making sure that you have financing, all that stuff. But I think that's also really tough because, again, it's out of your control on the other side too. Like, at that point, as an example, if I'm on the buyer's end and Alex is talking about it, advising his clients in that situation, do I really want them spending a bunch of money on appraisals and inspections and all that kind of stuff for the sellers to be like, yeah, thanks so much for doing the home inspection. I wasn't able to secure anything on the other side. Like, a lot of times all of these things need to line up. So in that situation, maybe I'm wanting the sellers hypothetically, of course, to, maybe instead of 2 or 3 weeks to secure their property or secure that offer on the other place, maybe I'm hoping that they get that before my clients, spend any money. But with that being said too, what happens if you commit to buying that place, they go to do the inspection on the next home, and what if it's an absolute bomb? Like, what if there's a bunch of issues? So there's a lot of moving parts. On the other end of that too, we're talking about dates is, if you're subject to sale or if you're not subject to sale and maybe you're just committing to selling and going to find something, how long do you need to ask for? Because, it might take you 2-3 weeks or a month to find a place. They might be looking at something. So you're needing to line up all these dates. In a perfect world, we don't want people to move twice. We don't want people to be living in hotels or Airbnbs or whatever. So just a ton of moving parts, I think, to summarize.
So hypothetically, could you have a subject to sale and a subject to purchase in the same transaction?
It's a good question. I guess.
Couldn't you technically have that? I mean, that would be a logistical nightmare, though.
Who blinks first on removing conditions?
You got both sides trying to figure. Oh my gosh!
No, that'd be a nightmare. I think that, and the one thing I just wanted to quickly add was I guess one thing not to do is give yourself some sort of a margin, right? Like, if you're looking to buy something, I don't know, let's say you're selling for 600 and you have to sell for 600 in order to buy for 950, you should probably be looking at 900.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, that should be the number. And if it works out better, great. But you shouldn't be maxing yourself out on both ends, because that's assuming that you're going to get X amount of price, and then you're also going to be able to, get whatever kind of a deal it is on the other end. So always have some sort of wiggle room in there. Don't base it off of best case scenario. Always base it off worst case scenario.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because we talked about the one side, but I think you're right. Look at it from both sides. That's well said. Anything else you guys want to add about upsizing?
I mean, I guess I could speak on a personal experience in the last year or so. So we made the move up from condo to a townhome, and it was, it's been in the last couple of years haven't necessarily been the greatest markets per se, but I always look at every single market as there's an opportunity for somebody. It's just, who is it? And right now it's first time buyers and upsizers, in my opinion, for, just generalizing. And so we saw the opportunity that, yes, even though technically our condo was worth a little bit less than maybe it was in 2021, 2022 when the market was peaking, the difference there when we're purchasing, again, let's say it was 50,000 less than we could have got when we absolutely topped out. The places we were looking at were $200,000 more at the very peak of the market. So that's, $150,000 difference. But it's very easy to kind of get tied to, oh, well, we could have got this, instead of thinking okay, but what is the holistic view, or what does the whole picture look like? So we went the route of selling first, knowing exactly what we had, and then going out and purchasing later, just having some longer dates. Did have a good situation where had a backup plan that we could live with my parents for a small period of time if needed, if we couldn't line up those dates, which we ended up doing. It's actually, I'm not even going to get into it, but they have a suite and their renters were gone for the time. So we were actually able to basically rent it for them for the month. And then those renters were coming back in November. But even if that didn't work out, we still had an option. So not everyone has that. So you do have to take that into account. But both times I've purchased, we have paid over asking and been in multiple offers. And this was not a multiple offer market. However, and this is difficult for everybody, especially for your own purchases, and if you're not as numbers focused as I am, but and this is just a general tip, is just focus on what the market value is. Who cares what the list price is? Mm-hmm. Who cares if you're paying more or less than that list price? Figure out, hey, here's where market value is. What are we comfortable with doing? Because both times, in my opinion, based on my analysis, we actually paid under what the market value was, even though we paid over the asking price, which can be hard to stomach sometimes. And, I do this every single day, so it's a little bit different. But if you can almost get out of your own way and just let the numbers speak versus being overly emotional, I think that can definitely help out. And on the selling side too, right? We didn't sell for over asking, and we maybe sold slightly lower than our ideal situation, but we were significantly better than our worst case situation. And we were happy with that because everything still made sense. It was still, where we had seen things or evaluated things, but it would have also been very easy to, hold off a little bit longer and just hope that things got better. But as I hear on another podcast, actually, they say a lot of times, hope's not a very good strategy.
That's that old Quest Trade commercial. Hope is not a plan.
Oh, there you go. anyways, that's kind of my personal experience. But yeah, as I said, every situation is a little bit different. That's how we went about it. And yeah, I just try and, act on the things that I would give the same advice for, right? So
yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think from my personal experience with upsizing, yeah, definitely can you get in your own head a little bit. You second guess, the same way I run my numbers. This is my opinion on what I think it's worth. You kind of go through your checklists and your procedures and systems that you use for your business, but you also using personally. But yeah, it can be stressful. And I think one thing just to keep in mind for us, or one thing that I think about out loud, is we do this every day and a lot of people don't. When we're saying, like Alex said, well, from my math was in multiples and I went over list price, but this is not my opinion on market value. I think that's very, as much as we talk about it, I think it can be a lot to grasp, especially when you hear things on the news like, oh, well, things aren't selling, market's slower, and then all of a sudden you might be paying over list price. Again, list price is not necessarily market value. Like Alex had talked about, people he knows in a worst case scenario where they're having a yard sale their place because of individual situation. Like sometimes you can save a percentage point or two, but just also know that that's the exception, not the rule. And over a long enough time horizon, most things kind of work themselves out. So that's kind of all I have to add.
Yeah, and the one thing I was going to say too is, like, for us, like, we're realtors and we use realtors to sell our places, and I think that can be a good sounding board too.
Yeah,
because that's how I act for my clients. It's a little bit easier to emotionally detach from the situation and just be very rational, and even being, I'd say, like, pretty rational guys ourselves. It is nice to have that kind of third party to give us the guidance and get us to take a step back and step down a level. And yeah, that definitely helps, even though we do this every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's well said, guys. All right. So is there anything else? Upsizing, any other personal experiences you guys had with navigating that maybe you want to share with anybody else? Or if not, we'll wrap it up there.
I guess maybe just very quickly, sometimes, or a lot of the time, people, I find, learn more from an experience than you telling them like what to do. For instance, as soon as they lose out on a subject to sale offer, I've had people that are just like, you know what, this isn't going to work because, like, we had our heart set on that one. We'd like to go the other route. And sometimes sometimes you have to go that way. And I think as nice as it is for everyone to maybe take the advice that probably is a little bit better, sometimes you just have to go through it yourself in order to, unfortunately, feel the pain and change your mind and make that decision.
Very well said. Austin?
No, I'd echo what Alex said. It's you learn through experiences, and again, sometimes you want to move because of that certain place, but I think for the most part things always work out. Another example, client that I was working with this year wanted to upsize. Spent money on we basically got to the inspection and there were some pretty substantial deficiencies that we didn't feel comfortable taking on our own, and we chose to walk away from that deal, but we ended up in a better place. So again, just also trusting the process and not just buying, as much as you want to use the data and all of the procedures and systems that we have in place to establish market value, and then different approaches from inspections, like, is it a safety issue, is it an active hazard, is it a leak, versus wear and tear and maintenance on a house. I think those kind of fall in different buckets. But yeah, just also know when it's time to walk away as well, and know that you can pivot to something else, especially in a market like we're in, where there's lots of different inventory out there. Just know that, just be reasonable. Don't ask for the sun, moon, and stars. Know what's fair to ask for from an inspection and what's not. And yeah, just treat each transaction, individually. Yeah,
very well said. I think if I had to summarize, I would say that upsizing can be challenging. There's things that you can do to make it easier for yourself, for sure. You've got to set realistic expectations about what you're selling as well as what you can buy. Definitely get pre-approved as soon as you're considering doing that, so that you have a good idea of what it is you can actually afford. And then ultimately rely on the people that have done this and have the expertise. Those are the people that can help you navigate this. And if that's us, great, we're happy to help, but just don't hesitate to reach out to those people that can help you navigate this.
Very well said. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode, everybody. We will see you next week, and take care.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.